Welcome back. Day 3 of the September plenary meetings of the IAASB. It's late afternoon here. For some of you, it's evening. Some of you, it's morning. Glad that the board and TAs and staff are back. And of course, welcome to all of our public observers and official observers to this call. We are going to continue our discussion on the draft work plan. As you know, this is in anticipation for its approval in December. So we're getting a head start on this. And then we're going to turn to the conforming amendments as a result of QM. And Brett will help take us through that discussion. So on the draft work plan, we were left with a cliffhanger. Josephine asked us a question, and we have an answer for you, Josephine. And then I'll turn it over to Bev and Billy to help us work through the questions. But the first question will be about the analysis, and then we'll talk about the work plan itself. So Billy, you want to respond to Josephine?
Yes, thank you, Tom. So Josephine, I think the question you asked yesterday is based on the question 4 in the survey, whether we are actually able to conclude that what the respondents told us is that all the projects that we indicated would be underway at the start of 2022 has to be completed before we start anything new. So I think we went back to the survey. I think we are comfortable that the backdrop of that question 4 is where we explained the work that will be ongoing at the beginning of 2024, as well as the flow of the projects and the targeted dates for those projects. I think what we saw in the responses from the survey respondents is that they did indicate views, obviously not all of them, but there were many of them that did indicate views around the relative prioritization of those projects in terms of that would be ongoing at the beginning of 2022. Some of them also commented on timing of projects, as well as in certain instances, project scope. I think what we also need to remember, and we did highlight that as well, is that projects can certainly start as other projects complete. So as capacity starts to open up, we can start with new projects. And I think we indicate in the draft work plan that staff can start with a project in the background probably 6 to 9 months before we will have the first plenary discussion at the board level. So I think there will be a sequencing of projects completing and new projects starting. And in all of this, we spoke yesterday about the detailed quarterly work plan that we will also post on the website, is we are also trying to create a little bit of capacity that we are able to pivot if something in the environment changes or because of the implementation of the monitoring group proposals, etc. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we are comfortable that we can conclude that we got the direction that we should continue to prioritize these projects, but in the context as I've explained.
Josephine, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. I just wanted to double check that we weren't reading or inferring anything that wasn't actually there. So thank you. I appreciate that. That all makes perfect sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. What I thought to do, I think if you can see the slide that's projected on the screen, I think we should probably deal with question 1, and particularly the analysis of the stakeholder input set out appropriately. I think that's an important due process question, because the next thing that follows is what we're going to do with the analysis. So as it relates to 1A, how do people feel that the analysis is appropriate of stakeholder input as set out in sections 1 through 4 of agenda item 4? Any comments? Anyone, I guess, disagree with it or have something they want to add? Okay, I see no hands. So I think people have the ability to read the letter, I mean, the analysis and the survey results, and IAASB's letter as well, and are happy with what the staff have prepared. So the next question really is what we've done with it. And I guess that's formed in the planning committee's recommendations and then the initial work plan draft. And I may, as we go into this, maybe it's from a process standpoint, good for Billy and Bev to explain how we will incorporate this and how this will lead to a final product in December. And how, Billy, do you want to just describe where we're going from here to December? So that may color the way people input to us.
Okay. No, I'm happy to, Tom. So I think we had a slide on yesterday where we've indicated, obviously this meeting is where we provide the board with the feedback and the initial draft, and we hope to get your feedback today. After that, staff will incorporate those comments in a turnaround document, which we will then also take to the planning committee. Like we see, the planning committee acts as the task force for this work plan. So we'll probably have a planning committee meeting towards the end of October. And then what we want to do, because just taking into account that in the December meeting, we'll have the approval of ISA 600 and we will have the approval of the fraud project proposal. We really want to make sure that the December session on the work plan, well, we'll only have capacity for a December session on work plan that will really just be one session to approve the work plan. So there won't be a time to do a third. So what we suggest is we will then early circulate an updated version of the work plan to the board, get the board's input, process that input, and post that version for purposes of the board meeting for December. And then we only need one session in the December meeting to approve the work plan. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, I'll invite comments on the planning committee's recommendations and the work plan as set out in agenda item 4A now. Anyone want to lead off? Edo.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all again. And thank you for Willy and his team and the planning committee for documents presented to us. I'm a little bit in between on whether this was a comment on analysis, but my attention got more grabbed by the recommendations in light of the analysis that I'm making a few comments. And I was struck a little bit by the analysis as it came to some of the standards, particularly when it comes to analytical procedures and audit sampling. And there seems to be, particularly in those projects, a lot of comments made in light of technology. And I'm wondering if there is another way of looking at, rather at looking at these standards individually, but whether or not there would be merit to a more of a, I guess, a holistic audit evidence type project that incorporates technology towards those standards. I think I felt that was more the pain point where it was focused on, rather than that the fundamentals of the standards were broken. So I wanted to bring that to the consideration of the planning committee. And I guess based on what, probably also the sentiment around me, but also a bit of reading on where comments were coming from. And I was missing this in table B, and I understand that this is as and when resources become available, but there's no ranking in what we do first. Well, there is a breakdown between audit and assurance and reviews, and in there, I assume there's a ranking of what goes first, and I understand that. But I got the sense that the first bullet point under assurance, when it comes to non-financial information, ESG, climate change, that's probably ranked higher than any of the audit topics. That may be just my gut feel based on reading it, but I was missing that sense of priority. What are we going to focus on first? And I guess, yeah, that's maybe something to consider. And I'll leave it with that, Tom. Thank you very much.
Okay. You raise a point about audit evidence and technology and the holistic approach, which is something we heard clearly in the comment letters. Anyone else? It's an important topic, and I want to focus on this before we get to others. Not that others are, but I assume that maybe others want to come in. For those with their hands up, could you physically raise your hand if this is the topic you'd like to come in on? Okay, so Diane, Chudley, you go first, then Diane, and then we'll get to others.
Thanks. So I have other comments as well, but just on Ado's point, I think the point about a more holistic review of our standards on the impact of technology and also the work that is going on with audit evidence, needing us to look at beyond audit evidence, and just on I guess the way of working, and for 500, for example, our project scope has been approved by the board in the project proposal, and I think we went back to have a quick look at that. It does not necessarily cover a more holistic review of everything else, like 520 and 530, and I'm seeing in paragraph 29, A and B in particular, saying that we could potentially do that. I'm just wondering, administratively, is that something that is possible for the task force to administer, given how the project proposal is being approved? And I tend to agree with what the respondents have said in terms of how we should be approaching this particular project. So it's really just a question in my mind, if the respondents are saying this and in the paper, this is what we're suggesting, is the task force able to actually proceed with that kind of approach if they decide to do so? Thanks.
Okay, Diane?
Yeah, it's interesting that Ado brought this up, because when I read this, that was the first thing that came to my mind is there an opportunity to bundle sampling and analytics somehow connected to technology? Now, I paused for a minute because we've got practices in all different levels of maturity, and what I do in my audits is not this consistent. It may not be the same as what other people are doing. So I think we have to be careful about applicability, but I do think the use of data analytics has a huge impact on analytics and correlations and looking for outliers. It is directly tied to that. And then obviously the ability to use data analytics allows you to look at 100% of a population, how that work goes, has impacts onto your sample sizes if you go back to the audit risk tables and some of those data points. So I think there could be an opportunity. I don't know if it needs to be a standard setter. It could just be done through application material in terms of bundling some of these questions and challenges that maybe the practitioners and others are seeing out there into something dealing with technology. So I would be supportive of that. I also agree with Ado, just trying to understand the priorities of where all these pieces landed, but I do agree with there's an opportunity to bundle. Thank you.
Okay, so of the people with hands up who want to come in on this point, I see Josephine. Josephine, come on in.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Ado. I agree with Diane. I agree with Chun-Wei on this completely. I was slightly disappointed by what seemed to be the fact that all the hard work the technology working group are doing in terms of non-authoritative guidance, the work in ISO 315 and so forth, the work in the quality management standards that we've done in this area, there still seems to be that need for yet more. And I do like the idea that Ado suggests of a holistic approach. I absolutely recognize Diane's caution on applicability. I think we do need to take that into account. I am concerned about opening up standards, as it were, just to address technology, because I'm very much a believer that the requirements should be applied with or without technology, and that should always be the case. And so I do think it is a different solution to our normal standard setting solution here. And so, yes, can we look at it as a bundle, as a whole, and step back and really ask ourselves, is there actually, for example, is 520 actually broken? Probably not. But it is definitely an area where technology is used quite extensively. So that's why I just wanted to jump in and support others' views on that. Thank you, Tom.
So I imagine your hand up is related to this issue too, is it? On the
No, it wasn't
No.
specifically, but
Okay.
I do actually agree with the comments that are coming through.
So Roger, I see your physical hand up too. It's sort of like a double-handed comment. You got the digital and physical.
Well, that was specific to this particular point. I agree. I think we've got a great opportunity here in bundling together. So just a little bit of a different approach to the work plan of doing these things, because I do think the technology issue is permeating through these particular areas. So I would very much encourage that bundling approach that Edo had suggested, and other people have supported. I think it would be very appropriate and would go down well with the constituency as well.
Okay. So it's funny. Anyone else on this topic? You know, we do these pre-board meetings with staff. I sit down and we talk about what are the types of topics that we're going to talk about at this meeting. And this was, on this topic, the number one we were anticipating comment on, and along the lines that were being discussed. Clearly, that was one of the strongest things that we heard. I didn't see anyone thought that what we were doing on audit evidence by itself was wrong. In fact, right in many ways. But what more with technology, and will that be sufficient, is how I read it. And that's sort of the steer we're getting from you. And there's the question of whether it extends merely to the 500 series or beyond. Billy, I don't know if you want to share a little bit of our reflections on some of the options ahead for us. And we don't have decided today, but bring this back to the planning committee. But why don't you share some of our initial thoughts?
Thank you, Tom, and quite right. I'll share some of our initial thinking, but subject to the fact that we obviously need to discuss this with the planning committee in a little bit more detail. And I think, you know, when we look at this, technology is a pervasive topic, and I think that brings the challenge in terms of how we bundle, if I can use Diane's words, in terms of how we might bundle these things. So, you know, that does cause us to pause, because I think one of the other things we heard from the responses is that there was also this notion of when we look at audit evidence, we should have a broader approach and look at 500 with 520 and 530 are the ones that I think that were mentioned. And you almost then have to stand back and say, so what is the main driver here? Is the main driver people want us to look at all the 500 all the standards in the 500 series, or some of the standards in the 500 series, in the context of audit evidence, or is the main driver the technology piece? And I think if the main driver is the technology, and depending on where we fall on that, we might get to a different answer. I think we also looked at our project on 500 and the project proposal that we have at the moment and how we're progressing that work. And you will remember, and I'm sure Sue will correct me if I get this wrong, but the three main drivers of the audit evidence project is sources of information, professional skepticism, and technology. But I do think it is very important that we manage expectations in that regard, because although that project will address all three of those main drivers, it is in the context of 500 being a foundation standard that covers audit evidence, and that is a reference framework for the auditor throughout, as the auditor makes judgments about audit evidence and about information intended to be used as audit evidence. And yes, technology will be addressed, but to that extent, in that context. And maybe, you know, one of from a strategic point of view, our thinking at the moment is that that is a good start. It's a start in terms of that's the foundation standard, and maybe we need to have that framework in place. And then out of that, we could flow into a separate work stream if technology is the main driver, that there may be a scoping for a omnibus type of project. So those of you that might remember a few years back that we did an omnibus project on disclosures, where we took that topic, went into the standards that are affected and did that. And maybe we can do that type of omnibus project with technology being the subject matter, and go into, do we go into all the standards, or do we then just go into the 500 series of standards? And in that way, we can maybe achieve both objectives in terms of, because clearly we had an objective when we approved the project proposal on audit evidence. So we get the framework standard right, and then we go in, and if we feel technology is the main driver, we do those targeted changes in that 500 series. So Tom, I think that was some of the initial thinking, but like you said, that's all subject still to also a broader discussion with the planning committee.
And honestly, this raises one of the things I push the team on, and just to be transparent with everyone, is our philosophy about the inclusion of technology-specific topics in sync with the realities of today. I think people raise the question of applicabilities, which to me involves quite a conservative approach about locking too much in on technology. But is technology so pervasive in this world today and so specific? Do we have to sort of adjust our tolerance for specific technology mentions, considering how it is gone? So, you know, I think this is real live issues, and as we get into the disruptive technology discussions, it may become more and more real. So, I'll pause here for comments. Any other reaction on this topic? Sue?
Thanks. I just wanted to come in on the, particularly on the 500 area. I mean, this is something we have looked at sort of quite extensively, and Billy outlined, I think, the project scope, and actually a reminder of a lot of the discussions we went through when we were actually agreeing the project plan. And we've challenged ourselves quite regularly on some of the areas that we can look at and what it is reasonable to achieve in this kind of project. And probably one of the things we've been wrestling with is around the areas of kind of scope creep outside of the project plan. And that has come up most recently when we started looking at some of the consequential and conforming amendments, because there are a lot of areas that we could look at, but whether they are genuinely consequential and conforming from 500 is a real question. So I think this may not be the place, but there's obviously a lot of stuff that we are doing already. We are meeting Monday, Tuesday next week, and we have on the agenda for discussion there a couple of the points that actually I think it was Diane raised around some of the issue to do with outliers and things in particularly within data analytics, and so maybe there are one or two areas we're discussing, but I think it is important to manage expectations in the light of what Billy said around what is achievable within one particular standard. So I mean, the kind of discussion around a more omnibus type approach, I think would be valuable. But I'm sure we would, very happy to pick up and think about this going forward.
Thanks, Sue. I think this goes very much to Edo's point originally, though. One of the things that we could use our work plan for is sort of signal what's next. If we had sort of a direction to say, yes, we need to keep 500 scoped tightly in the way that we are because it's manageable. But we heard the comments that clearly came in and the expectations and the realities. This is the way we plan on building upon that foundation or addressing those other concerns, right? And that would be sort of next up type issues going forward and give a sense of what the prioritization is. I think that's responsive. Someone just raised their hand new on that point. I sort of need physical show of hands who, if they want to come in following this on this specific topic. Okay, Philly?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to also, in the context of managing expectations as well, just want to say, and this was very good feedback, but remember, it also then still boils down to, you'll remember Bev explained yesterday that we've got this big pot of topics, and certain of those have now risen to the top, and we had the 8 topics that we took to our stakeholders, and some of these other issues came up, and that's all fine, but we will have to make a work plan decision in the context of available board capacity and staff resources. And so it will come down to that. And that might mean a little bit of a trade-off between doing one project versus another project.
Thank you. Okay, that was a good discussion. I just wanted to focus on that point. We anticipated a discussion there. Anyone who wants to comment on other matters, please raise your digital hands again, and I'll come back to you. Okay. I think Sachiko has had her hand up the longest and dropped in and then raised it. Sachiko, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Tom. First of all, I just want to say I think it's really great that we have received 100 letters. I think it is the result of the hard work, particularly the team and the staff done. So I want to congratulate everyone's hard work. And my comment is on non-financial information. I think the situation surrounding disclosure and assurance on financial information has evolving so quickly, and new developments have been occurring one after another. I think it does include not only the movement in EU, but also others as well. For example, one thing I noticed is that FSB, Financial Stability Board, issued in July, I think, a report called a report promoting climate-related disclosure. And the report suggests some recommendation about third-party assurance on climate-related disclosure in the longer term as appropriate. So I think it is very important that IAASB continue to, of course, closely monitor development relating to this area, and also, most importantly, take action quickly when needed. So I think some notion and recognition about it in the plan may be very helpful. And on this point, I support the Edo's comment about non-financial information as well. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, sometimes we do a really good job at anticipating what the comments will come from. Sometimes less so. We won't tell you when that happens. But anyone else wants to come in on non-financial information? Eric.
Thanks, Tom. I found that the comments that Sachiko was making really resonated with me. I really think our work plan needs to create some space for monitoring the environment and really being on top of what's happening and identifying where things could really bubble up quickly so that we can react quickly. Not just the longer term project nature of a lot of this work. As an example, if there's a prototype sustainability standard comes out quickly, is it auditable? What are the implications for our standards? Can the board comment on things like that as they're evolving? Because as Sachiko mentioned, the pace of change is really ramping up, and I think it's something that we really, as I say, need to create space for so that we can stay on top of this. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And just I'll let I see you next. A rigorous wave is gets you on next. But this is partly the reason we broke this part of the work stream out to indicate it. But yeah, I think we may need some other mechanisms to clear out. The intent of it was to signal that we were willing to dedicate time and resources at the board in a thoughtful manner to it, and that it would be simultaneous to audit-related matters too. So it wasn't competing necessarily with audit-related matters. Lynn.
Good morning, everybody. And Tom, I know I'm on the planning committee and shouldn't be talking at this point, but I just wanted to reinforce what Sashiko and Eric said. I think this is the big new game in town and we need to keep on top of it. And that should include the possibility of opening up 3,000 for review. It's getting a little old and there are definitely opportunities to make it better. And the same in terms of potential audit standard going ahead, particularly with the climate change work that's being done across the world. So thank you very much for giving me this out of turn opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Shall we?
Thank you, Tom. I really just want to come in to support what colleagues have said. The last meeting that we had ended at 10 p.m. for me, and then after that I jumped on to a webinar which lasted till around midnight. And this is one of the many other climate-related, sustainability-related webinars and conversations that I've listened to. And I think the expectation is very clear. And in terms of timeline, as many of us know, IFRS Foundation is expected to make official announcement as part of COP26 about the setting up of an international standard board on sustainability with a priority on climate. And Lee White has expressed in some interviews that the target will be to have a standard in the second half of 2022. Now, what we have as a 3,000 and the guidance to assurance on ER, I really wonder whether as an extension of either the IAASB coordination work or a revival of an ER task force, whichever work stream, to really just follow that work so that we can have a timely response as well. Maybe the conclusion is that 3,000 ER suffice, or maybe a more targeted solution is needed. Either way, I think the expectation is that we keep track of development very closely and as the international standard setter for assurance and be very proactive in our response. So really just to support what Sachiko, Eric, and Lynn have said. And I've already came on the tail of other colleagues a few times. I just want to maybe just make one more comment so I don't have to raise my hand again. But to the other point that Sachiko said about in congratulating us with the 100 responses, I want to also come on with that. I think the hard work of everyone involved, and also I think the format is quite refreshing from what I hear from my stakeholders and my part of the world as well. And really that is what is attracting us responses that we have not been able to get sometimes before. And I was thinking about how we are going to do that for consultations where we really need that broader base. We need that for all the consultation, but in particular case, some of the specific work streams, like for example, LC. So really encouraging to also see for LC that we have actually set up another stream of mechanism to get input. So I want to also weigh in to congratulate us on that as well. So thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Okay, on assurance, NFI and assurance, Isabel? Kai, I got you next, okay?
Yes, thank you. And I wanted also to add an European voice to the debate on financial information assurance. It's very critical right now in Europe, and even being a member of a planning committee, I just wanted to echo the debate we already had with some other European IAASB member. It's really critical because not everybody is considering the work we did on EER, maybe because they consider ISAE 3000 is not enough subject specific. And so other players are starting right now to develop something totally new. And we have been there for a long time. We have developed a standard. We have developed a lot of guidance around that. And really, we need to continue our efforts on this topic because we already have a standard, we already have guidance. Of course, we can develop it further, but we are already in the place. And unfortunately, I can see daily that a lot of people seem to forget about that just because things as basic as the title of ISAE 3000 does not specifically relate to sustainability. And I think we really need to do something daily on this topic to remind everybody that we have already developed something that is suitable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. I'll say something that I said to our CAG on this topic because I entirely agree. We're at, there's a huge opportunity here to build ESG and sustainability reporting standards on a firm global foundation that's high quality. Of course, reporting standards are not our game. Assurance standards are our game. However, we have a strong basis for it. And there is a risk of fragmentation right now and a real risk. And many of you in your local jurisdictions have a lot of sway. And it's incumbent on all of us to remind people that ISA 3000 EER 3410 exists. What we need to convey in addition is, and through our work plan, I think we will hope to do it, is that we know our work is not finished and we're ready to assist. But we will be in trouble, or investors will not get, or other stakeholders will not get what they expect if each jurisdiction goes off on their own way and creates their own standards, particularly in the assurance side when IFAC survey shows that 80% of the world is using 3000 as the basis for it. So that's a call for you to be of assistance. We did gather our European board members a few weeks ago to discuss this very point, but it's not just exclusive to Europe, and you have voice too. And I asked our CAG members to play a role here. And honestly, there's not a day I don't go by without speaking to stakeholders on this same topic about the risk. We spoke to IASCO Workstream 1 a couple of weeks ago. I spoke to the PIOB. I think they could be a huge partner on this too. There is a risk of fragmentation here, and it's incumbent on us to speak to policymakers to avoid that. Any other, Kai Morton, sorry, I haven't meant to ignore you.
That's fine. It makes it easier for me now, since that I support what's being said here on non-financial information. It is boiling up to be one of the hottest topics on the table right now, and I think as you just summarized, Tom, it is something that we need to continue to signal out that we're ready to move on, and I think also show that we're ready to do something in addition, rather than just saying that we have 3000 and ER and that can be used, because as Isabel also said, they're looking for something more specific, and I think, as you said, Tom, that is what we're doing. So very happy to do that. Also supportive of the bundling of the audit and of the analytical procedures and audit sampling. What I do wonder though is that the comments made on the work plan on that was without seeing, let's say, the result of the audit evidence project, which may touch on some of the same issues in relation to technology. So whether or not it will be as big of a deal if we fix what we need to fix in the audit evidence project. So that's why I think it is important, as some mentioned, that to keep the scope relatively narrow to what actually the issues are, because I don't think the standards themselves on neither analytical procedures or audit sampling are broken, but we need to take into account some of the more recent developments. But doing that, we need to see where we get on audit evidence as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me summarize what I've heard, and I'll invite others if they want to come in on NFI after this, as the following, is that we have to do a better job in our work plan publication to actually signal the intent here, which is that we are willing to act in this space. We are, in fact, we'll consider resourcing this specifically, ready to go. As it relates, some of you said open it up 3,000, et cetera. I think all options are on the table. However, I hear a lot of unspecific commentary on 3,000. It's not good enough. It's not, but I don't, EER is not sufficient. We need more specific standards. Some of it obviously is very dependent upon what's happening on the reporting side. Some of it is non-specific, and I'm not sure informed by evidence, but with evidence, we're ready to move. I just, like we do with the framework for activities, we need to be informed by a specific piece of evidence about where 3,000 is deficient for the needs of users and other stakeholders out there. And we should be ready to act. And this could be, I think we've proven that we can act quickly, as we have with LCE when we put our minds to it. But I do think it has to be informed by evidence too, as well. But I am aware of what people say about 3,000 and ER. And so, yes, we know we're not ready for it, but I think we do have to somehow signal this more clearly in our work plan. Anyone else have anything to raise on NFI related? Diane?
Yeah, I mean, I would just come in. I think folks are aware that I was part of TCFD. You know, I was back in 2016 when we were sitting around the table trying to come up with the recommendations. I will tell you that as we developed those recommendations, we met with, 2,500 different organizations to understand what they're disclosing today, what their objectives are, what are their financial measurements, greenhouse gas emissions, use of electricity, so on. And so I think, to your point, Tom, I personally think we need to do something specific on climate, because it's a more complicated topic than I realized when I went on the TCFD, and much to their chagrin, they had to bring me along and explain to me what some of the issues were. But I do think it involves financial and non-financial. It could have audit implications, assurance implications, reporting implications. So I do think it's a fairly complex topic that may be worth, as you said, kind of getting a little bit more grounded, getting some more evidence as to what the challenges are, and then having a more informed decision as to what direction to go into. So I would just share that perspective with you. Thank you.
Right. And gathering evidence does not mean endless study. Roger?
I'll come in on this point too, Tom. I think we're well placed. We've always been thought leaders, especially in the area of climate change. And I think that our standards are there. I think one of the challenges for us is that as the reporting frameworks are evolving, is that the breakdown between audit and assurance is also breaking down. We're getting subject matter that are combined, and our dichotomy between audit standards and assurance standards is being challenged. And climate change and TCFD is a good example of that, but it's only one example. So, I think even as we set out this work plan where we draw the distinction between audit and assurance, It's been challenged in practice as to where we're getting these subject matter frameworks, which really cut across both of those, and how you combine those is a challenge for us going forward. So I think we are well placed. I think we should play thought leadership, but I think that's one of the challenges going forward, which sort of resonates with what Diane just said on climate change.
Yeah, and of course, Roger, one of the things I've been talking about, which is resonating with securities regulators too when I speak to them, is that in that blurred line, there's a risk of conflation right now too. And by conflating could undermine confidence in financial reporting as well, recognizing that non-financial information is evolving and maturing field. So, all of that's involved. It just shows the complexity of it and why we need to really have dedicated expertise and thought process to it all. Josephine?
Yeah, I was going to jump in on ESG, but I think it's completely covered, and I agree with everything that everybody's been saying and totally support the direction. I just wanted to also raise another point on a different topic. So if we're still
not ready yet, we're not ready for that. I want to make sure we're clear on it, but you have the floor
that's
now.
fine. So I'll stand down until this one's finished. Thank you.
Okay. So were you meaning to cover on ESG and non-financial?
I had a similar point to Ido actually about the prioritization, but actually you put down a challenge around 3,000, and so this afternoon I was giving a presentation around EER and 3,000, and just an observation is that we may have a kind of a packaging issue, in that the first thing I had to do was simply explain what we have in the tool bag already, and some of the phraseology. So it may not be as big as we think, but it might be about making something sort of more current. And then for the record, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it is really important.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, but I remember even up to the last minute on EER and the publication of EER, explaining to people that EER included ESG and other related areas seemed one of the issues we face. So it's a good warning. Okay, do you think we've covered non-financial information assurance adequately? I think the planning committee will take this all into account in the next version. Okay, hands up for any other topics. Josephine, I know you're ready.
Tom, it's Karen.
Karen,
from the PIB. Sorry, just a point of clarity. There's definitely the strong view on a non-financial. Does that mean you're going to wait until the existing projects are completed to do work, or are you going to move it up?
So the way we think about it, I think it goes into what Billy described as work that we would begin, assuming we get the resources to do it, which is something where we're actively working on right now, to prioritize this background work, to figure out, do the outreach, keep monitor events, be engaged quickly over the next several months, even before this. Remember, this work plan actually begins in January, but there's no time to waste a little bit on this. I speak to people on it. It's already happening, Karen, on the outreach front, but we're trying to resource up on this to be prepared to go. It's the question of what we do from an action step that has to be informed by, like we go through the framework too, but it could be quite urgent, active and urgent when we talk about. So does that give you context?
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful.
Billy, is that your understanding too of how we're operating this? Just want to make sure that.
Yeah, no, that was a good summary, Tom. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on the work plan? So we're 2 for 2 right now. Let's see if Josephine can make it 3 for 3.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to take the opportunity, if I can, to thank Bev and Jasper and the staff for all the hard work. I had an opportunity, and yesterday I jumped in on my question without even saying thank you. So I just feel awful. So apologies, but thank you all. Clearly, the turnaround was incredible. 2.5 weeks, amazing. So really appreciate that. My topic is actually the joint audits subject, and it is to Ado's earlier point about the priorities and where are we putting everything here. Perhaps I've misunderstood, but there seems to be a desire to go directly to standard setting or exploring standard setting in this area. I'm not convinced from what I've read that it is such a prevalence globally that we really need to act on it, or it's really high priority. Perhaps it's something that could be better suited to non-authoritative guidance. I understand in the jurisdictions where joint audits are more prevalent, mostly the national standard setters have addressed the issue of tying in the fundamental requirements of the auditing standards together in that situation. I mean, I may be wrong, but so that's what the impression I get from the feedback. So I am slightly worried that this one could take a priority over others that I believe are much more important. So sort of firstly, back to Ada's point, we do need some kind of prioritization here, and perhaps some of that can't really be done until you go through some aspect of your framework of activity there. But also I am slightly concerned about the what's being implied in terms of joint audits. Thank you.
Okay, Sue.
Thanks. I had another point around the timelines for the existing projects in process, which I kind of raised yesterday. But I think in the context of the work plan, it would be helpful to articulate why there are changes, if there are there, and for us to understand that. It's I don't think it's as transparent as it could be. And I'm particularly conscious in the case of 500, and particularly given the discussion we've just had around the scope and potential further feedback. Timeliness is one of the public interest issues. So if we are changing that, I think we need to be able to articulate why that is.
Okay, we're noting this, so we'll respond. Roger?
Yeah, I suppose my other points around the recommendations coming out of the auditor reporting post-implementation review. So it's a little bit over two topic areas. Look, we've done a very comprehensive post-implementation review, and I think as we work into the framework for activities, that effectively forms our research stage of our framework for activities. It is we've already progressed a lot of those areas with very specific guidance. So I think areas, and the one that jumps out to me is 720, which is not unrelated to other information as well. But I think that people are looking very closely at what is coming out of the post-implementation review and where it gets priority into the work plans. So I give consideration to that.
That's a discussion we're going to have tomorrow. Obviously, it will feed in whatever we conclude on that will feed into this work plan. So we'll come back to that tomorrow, mostly, but it's good warning to us. Diane.
Thanks, Tom, and apologies for coming back in. The one other topic that I just wanted to talk about and just mention is cyber. I think this is another area, and I see it in here. I don't see it didn't receive a ton of attention, but I do think it's an emerging area. I think there's still there is confusion, I think, about responsibility and what is the auditor's role relative to cyber, and does a cyber breach necessarily translate into the impact that cyber breach has on the financial reporting structure, and what are the auditor's responsibilities, what's the board's responsibilities, and so on. And so I use as an example of an emerging risk. And I think one of the things that's always a challenge, and it's a challenge in my day-to-day job, is thinking about what are the emerging risks that are bubbling up and try and get ahead of those. And I think cyber is a perfect example of something like that. So I just ask us maybe not to lose sight. I know it's hard. We have 8 million things on our list and only X amount of resources, but just to leave some wiggle room to be thinking about those emerging risks that may not be terribly prevalent today, but are on the horizon as the next issue that we're all going to need to address. Because I do think that subject in particular, there needs to be maybe some clarification, and it's similar to fraud. This isn't going to just be the audit profession or us trying to solve this issue, but I think there needs some clarity about responsibility and who should be looking after that. Thanks.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, there were a couple of specific comments that to respond to. Vili and Bev, I know you're ready to respond to them. Should I go to Vili first?
No, you can actually go to Bev. I think Bev is ready to respond to the ranking question as well as talk a little bit about joint audits as well.
Okay, Bev.
Thanks. And I'm going to say what I'm going to say, but we are going to have a look at how we present this in the work plan, because obviously it's not clear. So I think we'd broken them down by different topics, by audit, by assurance. And I think the idea was that that's the current ranking. So it would be likely that some of the ones nearer the top would be the next projects that come off the line when we're going to decide on a new project. However, remember yesterday on a slide we had that at the time that we decide the new topic, we're going to put it through the criteria. And Josephine, this is where one of the criteria are global prevalence. And what you will see with joint audits, it probably won't go into a category B topic because it doesn't have the global prevalence that, say, perhaps an ISO 330 would have. So that's sort of how it'll stay. It bubbles up to near the top of category A, because the one thing that I have learned about joint audits, it is more prevalent than you think. So I think that IFAC did some work in this area, and I really can't remember what the number was, but I was really surprised at the number of countries that have joint audits. The issue about joint audits is that they're all carried out very differently. And so it would be very difficult for us. So again, another one of the criteria, it would be very difficult for us to write guidance that could be used by all the countries that have joint audits. So we are monitoring what's going on. It's sitting there in category A, bubbling up because it is becoming more prevalent, but it probably wouldn't pass the category B criteria. And so all of those topics would go through the category B criteria. So at the time that we have capacity, then we would have a look at what's sitting at the top of each of those. We would put them through the criteria, and we would bring that to the board to have the discussion around, these are the criteria, this is what we think, how they meet the criteria, and this is what we recommend the next project is. So there would be transparency and discussion at the board around what the next project is. Again, and a little bit to the point of in the NFI area, and there's lots of different aspects of that. There's lots of things that are changing, and they're changing quickly. So next year, the conversation about the next project may only involve NFI because something has bubbled up and we really do need to act on that. So I think that's the idea of that. So, but we do need to make that a little bit clearer, sort of the ranking and sort of how it will flow into the next project. But the idea is that the ranking that's there is where it is now, but that again may change in 6 months, 12 months time when we have these conversations. And I did touch on the joint audits a little bit just to maybe help people understand sort of how that would flow through. However, I think it is sitting on that list because it is more important, or sorry, it's more prevalent than some of the other things that we've heard about that we only hear about in 1 or 2 jurisdictions. So that is why it's sitting on the list. So we want to give recognition to that. Vili, I'll hand to you to see if there was anything else that you wanted to say.
Yes, I can maybe just pick up on 2 of the other questions. Sue, the one around transparency, I think you raised it yesterday as well. And like I answered yesterday, I think the intention is really to still do that detailed quarterly forward agenda that will live on the website more as a living document. And whenever we change the agenda, whenever we change the detailed work plan table that sits on the website, we will also explain why timelines change. So the intention is when we turn the work plan document, we also will update that table. And I also just want to point out that whenever we've updated that table since whenever, but more recently we're doing it more often. We always do that in consultation with the PIOB as well. So we always get there as well. Sorry, and then the other topic, Tom, I think that that Diane raised around emerging risk and obviously specifically referring to cybersecurity, that topic is already in our big spreadsheet on category A. So what we intend to do, to the point that Bev has also just explained, is the forward plan that we actually take into the planning committee at the end of September. We plan to at least have a discussion with the board every 6 months to update the board on what's happening in category A and how those topics, that long list of topics, start to hit those criteria that Bev has explained, so that the board is much more up to date with how those topics are progressing relative to each other in that bigger pool of topics. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Any other comments on the work plan? This was really helpful to me. I don't know if I could invite any of the other planning committee members, if you have any reaction to it that you want to share. Okay, I think we're good on this topic. Got really good input. Will give us food for thought. Certainly, we've heard your input, and we will incorporate that. The next, I don't know if Karen or Jim, you would like to come in and share any more observations?
Tom, I think I'll just comment on what I'd said earlier, or reiterate that the particular topic, in particular the ESG, was of considerable conversation within our CAG meeting as it related to the work plan. So I think there's some thought that needs to go into an approach, and I think there's a lot that needs to be developed on actually the reporting side by someone other than the auditors. But it definitely, I think, is something that the CAG voiced an interest in moving forward, or at least considering the sufficiency of 3,000, or whether that is fit for purpose.
Thanks. I think Karen had already had the chance to comment, but you want to come in?
Yes, sorry. I think we all are living sustainability, whether you want to call it sustainability, ESG, climate. We see it every day, and so the PIOB is also noting that from the feedback that we received and from the environment that we're working in, that seems to really be of real interest. Maybe not interest, but maybe need. So it was very good to hear the conversation today, and I was very encouraged to hear these great minds today talking about an issue that's really of so much importance to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if you indulge me, I think we're ready to turn to conforming amendments right now. I just have a sense that maybe we could power through this before the break, but we will have a break if we hit halfway point in this session. Is that like a good idea? Keep going. Brett, are you available and ready?
Yes, I'm here, Tom, as is Armand.
Okay, great. I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, board. We're here today to talk about conforming amendments, just wrapping up this last little piece of the QM projects. I just want to first of all just reference that a lot of people involved have been involved over the life of this project in many different ways, but I particularly just want to note Armand's involvement over the last 6 months or so as we've been trying to finish this off. So well done, Armand. Michelle, if you just turn to the next slide, please. I will try to keep my remarks brief. It's not a terribly complicated exercise, and obviously that you've all got the papers, but I will just highlight a few points. First thing I'd just like to highlight by way of background is just that this project is really about reflecting previous board decisions made in the quality management project into the rest of the IAASB literature. And I want to mention that in the spirit of this is more like a housekeeping project. We're just making sure that we finish all the tidying up of all the loose ends that were created when we changed the quality management standards, particularly ISQM1, ISQM2, and to a much lesser degree 220. Because 220 obviously sits within the ISAs and it's not necessarily the genesis of these projects. So the purpose of this project very much is really about removing the conflicts that were created when we changed those standards and just making sure that these standards can continue to work together. And just to help with a couple of other points, we're not going to be approving the conforming amendments today. That will be done in October, so we'll do all the due process matters then. I will also just mention that we've previously discussed conforming amendment projects with the CAG, and we did that when we were doing the updates for the ethics revised code. The CAG at the time were a little, I don't know how I'd put it, and Jim, you may want to come in on this point, but they preferred to stay in the more strategic projects, and this is very much being a housekeeping project, is perhaps a little too detailed for them. So instead of our usual process of having a formal meeting with them, we're instead going to be sending them the papers and just asking them to come back with any written comments. And if we get enough areas of concern, then of course we're always open to having a call if we need to. But at the moment, we're not planning on doing anything. Jim, I'll just pause here to see if you wanted to comment at all.
No, I think that is more in line with where we can add value, is a little more on the strategic side. So I think that CAG was fairly happy with where we landed.
Thank you very much. Michelle, next slide, please. So in the last topic, you were discussing a project and initiative that received a lot of comments. For the conforming amendments, we received a grand total of 20. Which I would like to say is good because we reached double figures, which is always impressive. You'll see on this slide just a background of where those people came from. Michelle, next slide, please. But perhaps the more interesting part is what did we hear? In general, the vast majority of comments were very supportive, happy that we did the project, supportive of doing this kind of housekeeping initiative. We got 2 letters that were opposed to the way that the project had been conducted. It wasn't so much a disagreement that the project was necessary, it was more that they felt the project should have gone a lot further, and that by not fully aligning all of these standards with everything that was in particularly 220, it could have been read that we were suggesting that these standards weren't as important or weren't as the same quality as the ISAs. So as you would have seen in the issues paper, our response to that is very much that this was always intended to be a limited narrow scope project. So we've stayed faithful to the board's intentions in approving this project. Probably the bigger issue is though that it's not a question of quality. It's not a question that these standards are of lower quality. It's a question that the market for these services, the market for these assurance engagements is very different. The practitioners aren't necessarily the same, the firms aren't necessarily the same, and certainly the users of the assurance reports created or review reports created is not necessarily the same. So there is certainly a danger in assuming that that translates into lower quality. Of course, there's nothing to prevent the board from coming back and doing a much more fulsome review of those standards in due course. That would, of course, happen via the framework for activities process and the normal work planning process. Michelle, next slide, please. Okay, so Armand and I spent a fair amount of time breaking up all the comments that we received into 4 categories. The 4 categories are on your slide there. Probably the only one that's of great moment for the board is particularly that last one, the ones where we decided not to make the change that was requested. And I'll spend a little bit of time on those as we go through this next section. I will also just mention at this point that we did, as just part of our own internal due diligence, we did share this with a couple of standard setters that have, national standard setters that have done that. So I'd just like to publicly acknowledge that we did receive support from Si Wen from the Australian board and Jackie from the Canadian board, and we're very grateful for the time that they put in, looking at these and providing us with comments. Next slide, please. So just delving into the detail a little bit more, particularly in those areas where we didn't make changes that were requested. We did get, I think it was one or perhaps a couple of comments on ISRE 2410. This is a standard that hasn't been updated in any of our conforming amendments for quite a long time. It is in pre-clarity format, and our concern has always been that updating it is a much bigger job than it may seem to be on the surface. It's not just a matter of changing a few words. So we knew that when we did the exposure draft, so we haven't changed from that position. Probably a larger question is we did get a couple of people who wrote back about the definition of engagement team. And there were two issues here. The first one is, I think, a relatively significant point that's an outworking of the decisions that we made in the quality management project. And the one that is there, the one that relates to upstream and downstream supply chain audits. Now, this isn't obviously mainstream financial statement audits because they don't happen this way. That's the sort of more group audit space, and you have that normal experience where you're going to have a group and there's some degree of control, and you have these odd occasions where you'll have something like an equity accounted investment where there's not necessarily control, but you've still got to do some accounting. The challenge here is really in assurance engagements where you're required to report on something that's outside of your control. So, for example, in the sustainability space, this might be emissions that are, scope 2 or scope 3 emissions. You don't directly do them, but you import them into your organization because you buy electricity, for example. And so, in those circumstances, a cold read of the definition of an engagement team could suggest that you have to direct supervise and review those upstream auditors. And recognizing, of course, that those upstream auditors of an electricity company are therefore going to have to be directed, supervised, and reviewed by all their clients' auditors, which seems on the face of it to be a somewhat impractical outcome. At the moment, what we're suggesting is that we need to be faithful to the quality management standards and the way that that was resolved in the quality management standards. So we're not proposing to accept, to back out of where we landed. However, we did suggest in the paper that this is a topic that does require a little bit of further study and some serious attention in due course, particularly as we get into that sustainability space more and start to look at the implications. The second comment I'll make here is we did make some changes to the definition of engagement team, and it's particularly to delete the words that you'll see marked up on the screen there. It's a fairly technical change, but basically it was just to align a little bit better with ISQM 1. There is one standard that we couldn't do it to, which is 4410. And that was purely because it doesn't have a definition of a practitioner's expert. It is a little bit of a technical topic. I won't spend any more time on it, but I'm happy to explore it if someone does want to ask the question. Okay, last one on this slide, engagement quality reviews. We got a couple of comments on this one. Essentially, it boiled down to differences of views about how important EQRs are for these type of engagements. And I guess we're particularly talking about the 4400 series, but perhaps also the 3000 series. So the way that we approached this was very much to go back to the principle. And the principle was that we wanted to retain all the references to ISQM2 that we had in the standard. And we felt that those references were a helpful and necessary pointer for practitioners as they're adopting these new standards to just remind them of where it exists. And in going into this, we fully appreciated that EQRs may not be as widely prevalent in this space. But having said that, if they are done for one of these engagements, presumably that's because the firm has chosen to do it and because they felt that there was a quality risk that would be best addressed through this route. And therefore it is important, in which case the references to engagement quality reviews are quite important. We did make some minor changes to 4400 just to align with some of the other standards. And it particularly affected the dating of the engagement report and just a reference that you shouldn't date it unless the EQR was done. Okay, next slide, please. I just very briefly touch on a couple of things, and these are more general categories rather than specific comments. We did have a couple of areas where we didn't take the comments on, and in general, they broke down into two categories. One was there was a request for more wording alignment than what we'd done in the exposure draft, as in things should be tighter, things should be much more closely connected, should be using the same wording in more places than what we'd already done. Sometimes it was referring back to the QM standards and saying, you've aligned with this paragraph and not this paragraph, and we would prefer the latter paragraph. The other sort of category in this area was where people felt that we should have added either a little or a lot more detail to better explain a point or something. The principle that we adopted here was to follow the narrow scope amendment process that we set out in the project proposal. We've tried to stick very closely to that. And so we've taken the comments on where we felt that they really did improve the quality and were consistent with that project proposal, but otherwise we've tried to stay away from it. So we've made the changes where we felt it was appropriate, and of course, very happy to take comments on any other changes that we should have made. Next slide, please. So we're up to the going through the questions for the board now. My proposal here is to take these two questions together for each of the standards that we've got. I'll do them in a little bit of blocking. But again, if there are more detailed comments that you want to submit in writing, I'll cover that on a later slide, just how we can handle the process for that. But Tom, I'll turn it back to you, and we perhaps just go through the standards one by one, 2400 being first.
Okay, you said you want to go one by one, so we're doing 20. Is there a slide to indicate which number we want to go through, or we'll just go through the?
I'm afraid not.
Okay, 2400 first. Any comments? I see none. We're good with that. What's the next one?
3000.
3000. I see no hands up. I think we're there. I'm just scrolling through. Slide. What's the next one?
3400.
3400.
Perhaps, Tom, if there aren't a lot of comments, perhaps we could do this the other way and just ask members to put their hands up if they do have a comment.
Yeah, Josephine.
Thank you. Thanks to Armand, Brett, for all the great work here. I really appreciate it. I have absolutely no comments. Thank you. Other than in one particular section, which you already alluded to, which is the change that was made to 4400. And apologies that I didn't mention this before as we were actually going through this process and put the document out for exposure. The requirement in Q in paragraph 30Q that the engagement quality review is required in accordance with ISQM1 and shall not date the report until the completion, etc. On reflection, we thought that this actually ought to be consistent with the placement of this requirement in paragraph 22036. So it's not really directly a transparency requirement for the date of the auditor's report. It's actually more of a work effort step in terms of quality management. So we think that the additional consideration would be better placed in perhaps paragraph 19, and that would mean inserting it as a new subparagraph, say 19b. But we do believe it is actually a quality management requirement rather than a reporting requirement. And so it's really a geography matter, but also technically it's probably better there. And then I think it's the same again for another one of those paragraphs where this crops up. And that's my only suggestion and comment. Thank you, Brett.
Sue?
Thanks. Just to say, Brett, we've sent in a few comments. They are very small editorial and consistency things, including one of the places where you've still got the reference to the expert engaged by the firm or network firm. But I don't think there's anything significant there. Hopefully you can take them into account.
Thank you. Taylor?
Thanks, Tom, and good evening. Tom, I would like to respond to question 1 and 2 together. Is this possible? Okay, why there are this matter that I would resolve differently than set forth in the proposed changes to the conforming and consequential amendments shown in agenda item 3A. With one exception, I do not see any potential fatal flaws in the proposed changes that therefore support them. The one matter that causes me great concerns is the issue raised in paragraph 20 of the issues paper relating to the impact of the change in the definition of engagement team on engagements performed under ISAE 3000 and ISAE 3410 that cover information provided from the supply chain outside of the corporate group. I had mentioned this issue when I had abstained from voting on ISQM 1. While it is encouraging that, as described in paragraph 22, this issue be further explored, I'm under the impression that the urgency of the issue is being underestimated. Let me tell you, legislation is in the process of being issued in the EU, requiring CSR reporting for many types of entities, even beyond PIEs, that will require the inclusion of information from supply chains outside of the corporate group, where having the practitioner direct, supervising review of the practitioners assuring the information from outside the corporate group may not be a viable solution. I therefore recommend that the IAASB consider this matter with some urgency. The task force appropriately amended the other IAASB standard due to the changes to ISQM 1. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Brett, a couple of comments for you to react to.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom, and for the board members who commented. Let me just take that last one first. Kulve, fully agree with you. I think there is certainly something there that does need to be investigated. It's a bit difficult to act when we don't have a clear understanding of the issue. So at the moment, I'm in a position where I feel that the board's best course of action is to stay the course, finish the job that we started with the quality management projects, respecting the fact that you did raise this issue back when we were approving the quality management standards as well. But to not approve this project would leave us in a worse position. We would have standards that are now no longer in conformity with the quality management standards. That's a very significant matter for everyone to have to deal with. Josephine, just your comment about the location of that dating paragraph to do with EQRs. Let me have a look at that. I did explore it in a previous version of this, and I found it a little bit jarring when I tried it in the quality management paragraphs. But let me have another look at it. Maybe it was, it's just maybe a second glance we'll find a different way to get to the same answer. So thank you very much for that one. Sue as well, thank you very much for the written comments you sent through. Yes, they will be very helpful, and I do appreciate those. Just that last comment that you made about the those words that haven't been deleted, I think you've hit upon the one place where my solution won't work, and we do actually have to keep the words in. But perhaps I might take that one offline because it might be a bit of a requires opening a whole bunch of documents at once to explain it. But if that's acceptable, I'll take that one offline.
Imran?
Thank you. Good evening. It's close to midnight and I got to be careful anything I say at this hour of the evening, but I'm sure about this that I'm about to say. Brett, thank you very much. With your change in role, this feels like it's part one of your farewell tour. But I know you've warned us that there will be another part to this in December still when we approve these changes. Brett, my technical advisor, Kumukwashe, has been running the South African project on this, and you can appreciate that the knock-on effect on locally issued guidance is substantial. And we've progressed a great deal, and we've also used the methodology that you've used in making local changes, and it's been extremely helpful to follow this example. We're close to finalizing the process. Applying that back, though, in terms of what has been presented for this evening's meeting, we have just a handful of editorial comments, and Kumu's worked too hard on this for me not to send them through to you after the meeting this evening. So if you'll allow us to send us through to you, they are in the nature of editorial remarks. I think you may want to take them on board, but none that I have to raise in the clinic. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran and Kumo, for that as well. Brett, I have no other hands here. You want to bring this?
We just have one other question for the board, Tom.
Okay.
Michelle, if you just jump to the next slide, please. Okay, just the last thing to resolve here for the purposes of this meeting is just the effective date of these conforming amendments. I'm not really sure we have much of a choice here because we've already set the conforming amendment. We've set the data quality management standards, and logically these have to be in on the same date. I do just want to alert the board to, in general, we got widespread support from this. We did have a couple of exceptions. One was not in the nature of disagreeing with the dates. They were just pointing out that the dates can be particularly burdensome because there are a lot of changes coming through over a fairly short period of time. That came from an SME sort of firm background representative. The second one was just a comment specifically about the places in the conforming amendments which makes reference to a system of quality management, and that we need to be mindful and ideally put something in the effective date about the fact that the system of quality management has a different effective date to what we've proposed for these conforming amendments. The way that we've dealt with this one is, so first of all, for the first comment about the volume of changes, that's, I guess, a matter that needs to be considered in the fullness of time, but it's not really specific to this project. The comment about the ISQM1 changes, I've tried to explain in the issues paper, the proposal on how we deal with it. Essentially, it's a perfectly valid point, perhaps best addressed by the basis for conclusions, which allows us to really highlight those matters that we need to draw attention to. We can't actually, I think, do conforming amendments with two different dates. It will get very complicated, and I'm not even quite sure how we'd reflect it in a handbook or something like that. So I propose instead that we stick with the dates that we originally had, which are those on the screen and those that are consistent with where we landed on ISQM2, which also has that engagement level feature. Next slide, please. So just a question for the board here is the board still comfortable with the effective date as we set it in the exposure draft?
Does anyone disagree with that statement? I think everyone agrees with it, Brett.
Okay, next slide then, please, Michelle. Okay, so just to wrap this one up, we will be doing the formal approval in October as planned. We will try to get the comments, the draft final conforming amendments out to you as early as we possibly can. If you do have any written comments on the drafts that you've seen in front of you today, if I could just please ask that you send those through by Wednesday of next week. We do have a little bit of time to do a turnaround, but I'm really trying to avoid any changes in front of that October meeting. It just becomes very difficult for everyone to manage the volume of papers required in this sort of an exercise. So if we can try to get written comments in by Wednesday of next week, that would be very helpful. And I think that's it, Tom.
Great. Any other comments? Feedback? I'm not sure. Karen, Jim, any thoughts? Jim, we've already talked about the CAG process, so we're probably set there.
I don't have anything else, Tom.
Okay. Karen, anything?
And nothing from me.
Okay. I think we will bring it to a close. One thing I did want to highlight today, and if you've been following the LinkedIn for the IAASB today, is about the electronic handbook, right, Bev? And that's available, and that's great. Anything to say about? I see we're publicizing it today. May not have just been today.
It's the actual the blue book, the normal handbook that came out, and then tomorrow we're going to have a presentation about the electronic handbook, which will come in the next month.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's the extra half hour tomorrow. So, okay. Well, great work to everyone. Good day. For those who are at the end of their day, you get a little more sleep. So I'm happy for that. Len, would you like to come in?
Yeah, Tom, thank you. I just want to remind the board and TA there's a survey out there for our planning for a possible December in-person meeting. So for those who haven't responded, I would appreciate them respond to the survey. The deadline is tomorrow. Thank you, Tom.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll bring the meeting to a close. Great session today, really informative. I would take, if anyone who listened to us today knows that we're serious about ESG and sustainability and assurance related to that. So that's an important message to give out to people. And so I wish you all well for the rest of your day, or for those who are just starting their days, have a cup of coffee or tea and have a good one. I'll speak to you shortly. See you tomorrow morning. Bye.